So, I learned back in the day that sharing is caring. And that on this show, we're full of caring. And today's episode, we're going to be full of sharing. So we're going to kind of merge the two. It should work out. How's it going? What's going on? Welcome to another episode of AngularAir. I'm your host, Justin Schwarzenberger. And today we're going to be talking about code sharing between NativeScript and Web. We're going to see some demos from our guests and really get into it. So it should be pretty cool. Join us today as panelists. We've got Austin McDaniel. Austin, what's going on?
How's it going, everybody? I'm without my panda head. I am visiting some family for the holiday weekend, and I forgot to bring my panda head with me. So I'm without my panda head. Hope everybody had a good holiday weekend this weekend, too. I think America and then maybe Canadian Day was this week, too, something like that. So, yeah.
Yeah, multiple holidays on this continent. So yeah, hopefully everybody had a good time. And we can envision you with that panda head. So I think we're good, and we appreciate you being able to be available even though you're on the road. So that's cool. All right, our guest today is Sebastian. Sebastian, how's it going?
Yeah, it's all good. I'm calling from sunny London, which is a bit strange. It's super hot. So if I faint during the show, don't worry. I'll be fine. It usually takes half an hour for me to wake up again. So it's all good. So basically, I work for Telerik or Progress, the guys that created NativeScript. So hopefully, I'll be able to give you some insight today on what we're doing with NativeScript and code sharing overall.
Awesome. We're glad you're here. Yeah, I saw a tweet earlier from, I think Todd Motto was heading to Barcelona for Angular Camp, which starts tomorrow. And he said it was hotter in London than in Barcelona right now. So I guess you guys got a heat wave.
Yeah, the world is upside down. So yeah, hey, whatever.
Right. We adapt, right? We adapt and move forward.
Yeah, we either adapt or we just faint, right?
or we just faint and come back at it 30 minutes later, right?
Yep.
Cool. All right. So we're going to be checking out NativeScript, right? And then we're going to see it in as a context for how we can understand maybe code sharing between if we're building a native script application or web application, and could apply to not only just working with the NativeScript app and a web app, but maybe anybody who has multiple apps and want to share code between them in an Angular space. Does that sound correct?
Yep.
What is NativeScript for those that don't know?
It's a very good question. I mean, some people would even believe that I bribed you to ask that. But anyway, NativeScript is basically an open source framework that allows you to build mobile applications with JavaScript. So it's kind of like what you would do with like hybrid development, except we allow you to build a mobile application with the native UI. So you basically, and you have two approaches. You can either use NativeScript core, which is pure JavaScript or TypeScript, or you could use Angular. And then as a result, you get a mobile application with a native UI, which is pretty a big deal.
So it's kind of like React Native, maybe?
Yeah, so pretty much React Native is like the closest kind of cousin to what we're doing, except we allow you to use Angular and they use React.
Sure. And so I can just put in like normal inputs and things like that, and it's just automatically going to be like native feeling in my mobile application?
So almost, yeah. So pretty much everything that you used to around having your router, modules, services, components, all of that is just like you would use on a daily basis. The main difference is what goes into HTML. So for example, you wouldn't expect to have a paragraph or a div inside a mobile application. So what we have is like a different type of UI component. So basically the HTML tags that you use to describe what goes in the UI are different. But everything else, like the logic using pipes, etc., it works just out of the box.
So I couldn't just take a normal application that I have today in Angular and it just work in NativeScript. It's got to be custom components for NativeScript.
Yeah, they have to be, or at least the visual part of them, right? So that's what I'll be showing you later on, where you can actually have a single component that shares the code with the between web and mobile, which is completely doable.
Go ahead, sorry.
So it's just what goes on the screen that's the difference.
And so that's just the Angular compiler you guys are tapping into, right?
Pretty much, yeah. So the whole idea was that like Angular itself is platform agnostics, and then there's a platform-specific renders that take care of what goes into the UI. So like for web, Angular out of the box gives you like the browser renderer, but then if you want to build a mobile application for desktop, then you have Electron renderer. And then for mobile, you would have NativeScript render that kind of generates you the UI code for either Android or iOS. That's the idea.
Wow. That's super awesome. And sorry for a plug real quick, but a talk that was at in GConf right before my talk, I always am terrible with his name, talked about the Angular compiler and showed like a demo of it, like him compiling stuff down to A-frame with like Minecraft and stuff.
Oh, was that Minko?
Yeah, it was
Yeah,
Minko.
Minko. So if you're interested in the Angular compiler, that's an awesome talk to watch.
Yeah, I should definitely do that, especially that I like Minecraft a little bit. So I built my own cow shed back in the good days.
Nice, nice. Hey, Alyssa joined us. Alyssa, how's it going?
Hey guys, going great. Glad to be here. And I feel like, I don't know, did we just have you on the other podcast, I think like a week or two ago?
What,
Am I making
me?
that up? Yeah.
I
feel like...
think you're making it up. Yeah, maybe you just mixing up with NG Cruz, because that's what we did a little bit.
Like I keep seeing your face everywhere. You're just so popular. Okay, continue.
Or maybe you're just stalking me. That's probably the thing.
He's all over the web, very, trending right now. Sebastian's trending. So.
Oh, the web is trending very low then.
Nice. All right, so can you give us a quick use case of, like, let's say I am at a company and I'm building an app, and I'm like, okay, we're building this web app and we want to have maybe a mobile presence as well. Like, what does that story then fit into how we would be deciding, yeah, we want to use NativeScript. Maybe we've heard about like PhoneGap or Ionic, something like that. Like, how does NativeScript play into that story, and what would we be thinking about in terms of our strategy?
Okay, so the thing in terms of strategies is, well, like, what is it that you want to get out of the mobile application, right? So if you're building a simple app that, let's say, has a couple of forms and you just have to, I don't know, have a login screen, display a couple of items, and like you don't expect like a amazing user experience that you would have out of the native mobile application, then you're perfectly fine going with hybrid approach. But as soon as like you're trying to cater to the users who expect like the best kind of user experience, they want to be wowed by the user interface, they want to feel at home, like they want to know that they're using a native mobile application. That's where NativeScript comes in. So obviously we kind of sit in between, like the hybrid world, which is kind of low cost and kind of like share your web experiences and like cheap. But then you have some sacrifices in performances. And then on the other side is like 100% native, but that's expensive, but a top quality kind of like experience. So we kind of sit in between that. We can kind of still give you fairly low impact in terms of development, but still pretty high quality. So that's pretty much the thing.
So like if I was going to say, I have this app, I've already started it, it's a web app, it's got my own UI and kind of feel for that, but I've got it built out into Angular, I've got components, I've got all the goods, pipes, services, that sort of thing. Yep. And I'm like, okay, we want a kind of native experience for iOS and Android for this app, but we wanted to really reuse and leverage all of the architecture we've already written, the Angular stuff, all the plumbing, the TypeScript files, stuff like that. And we just want to provide that native UI feel for that app. This is where NativeScript fits in perfectly for it. Is that correct?
Yeah. So, and at this point, if you already have an existing web project, we kind of looking into two choices. So one choice is, I've got this web project over here, and you could separately create like a NativeScript project, and they could sit in completely separate folders. And what you could do at this point, say, I'm just going to copy over all these services and the components and pipes that I want to reuse, and then kind of like maintain them, which would be fine if your project is small. So let's say if you, have 5 to 10 components plus services, so kind of copying and pasting is not a big deal. But as soon as you're thinking of like going into the future, kind of like this is going to be running for years and I want to be able to maintain that, then the second choice really, we need a project with a single file structure where both your web and mobile files will be sitting in one place. So that's usually if you already have a web project that requires a bit of a migration process, which might be a little bit painful to begin with. But then once you have that, it's the whole process is like a dream.
Nice, nice. So sell me really quick on this concept of, let's say I've built my application and I have a very specific design feel and style to my application, right? And I want to keep that integrity on the mobile side of things. So I don't necessarily want my application and my style, my design of it to feel like a hard iOS app, right? I want to keep these. We have designs for buttons and drop downs and all these things that we worked hard to craft out. And we want to keep that in the mobile space. Like, why would I want to adopt something like NativeScript for that? Is there more than just that, or like, can you sell me on that?
Yeah, sure. Actually, that's pretty cool question, because, and here's the funny thing: if you build like a completely vanilla Hello World native iOS mobile application, it's going to look hideous. So you always have to apply some sort of styling. And then obviously we recognize that within the team. So in order to style your application within NativeScript that kind of applies to both Android and iOS, we actually allow you to use Sass. So like you basically have a CSS files and you can provide your own styles. So we pretty much mimic the same kind of syntax, the same kind of logic. It works exactly the same. The only thing is that we support a slightly different kind of properties in a way. However, if you already have your, let's say, branding colors for your system, like how your buttons should look like, how your backgrounds, how your fonts, what sort of things you use, then you could actually share the Sass files between your web and mobile projects, and then you just apply to slightly different styles between web and mobile. That's the idea. So like, like if you would have a style for a paragraph, you obviously that style wouldn't apply for a paragraph in mobile because we wouldn't have it. But we would, for example, have a label, and then you could apply it over there.
All right. I'm feeling that.
Yeah, the funny thing is like yeah, go on.
I said, can you have like custom components? So maybe I have like a fancy dropdown. Can you have these type of custom components that are like fancy, input fields like dropdowns that like selects that have like, type ahead and things like that?
Yeah, sure. So here's the cool thing. So all the UI components that you would use within NativeScript, they're native UI components. But as well, we have an ability for you to access the native API, which basically means that if you, for example, have a native iOS dropdown and a similar one for Android, you could actually import them in the project, create a very small wrapper, and you could actually have a very fancy dropdown. And then as an example, outside of NativeScript itself, we started creating this library of UI components called UI for NativeScript. And then inside there, we have, for example, text prediction, like the autocomplete input. So you can, for example, have a list of countries and you start typing GE and you go like, oh yeah, there's Germany and there's Georgia, right? And then kind of like gives you a pop-up so that you can choose, etc. But the best thing is like, if you have your own UI components that you want to import, like you can just add them to the project, and it really requires very little work to do it. And as well, like you can create your own styling and etc. as well.
So I know Progressive, formerly Telerik, sponsors this project. Is that correct?
I think so, although I don't know much about it, so probably not the best person.
I was just curious, who was, the main author of the project, and is it under the Angular project, family?
Oh, you mean for NativeScript itself?
For NativeScript, yeah.
As in people, I think so. On our side, it was Alex Vakrilov and Christo Deshev. They were like the two main devs that were working on the Angular extension for NativeScript.
Okay.
And yeah, they're still pretty rocking it pretty hard.
Awesome. I was just wondering, is this, as part of the Angular like GitHub repos and things like that? Like I would grab my router and things like that. So how would people, go and get this?
Oh, I see. So yeah, at the moment, like NativeScript itself exists like within its own repo. So if you go to GitHub/NativeScript, that's where we have all our bits. So if, for example, you want to create a NativeScript project, there's a NativeScript npm package. So you basically run npm install NativeScript, and then to use it to create a new project. Right now, we're not using Angular CLI. This is hopefully it will change in the near future. But if you want to create a new project, you just run a command like tns create, and then you provide a project name, and then this will generate you the. Oh, sorry, and you have to ask --ng to specify this for Angular, and then this will generate you the Angular project that is NativeScript ready.
Awesome.
So hopefully I'll show you some of that, maybe not the creation, just to save some time on downloading from GitHub, but I'll show you how TNS works and how you can actually run project, etc. So it's pretty cool.
Well, you want to get into some demos, show some code, and kind of start digging into this stuff?
Yeah, sure. Let's do that. So
I think I want to make a point here really quick before we dive into this, that, we're talking NativeScript, you're going to show it in that case, but I want our viewers to know that like there's going to be some really good gems in here for, even if you're not using NativeScript, just the concept of how we're going to share code and see how this process works for these multiple apps. So you can think of it as maybe I have a NativeScript app, maybe I just have two different apps, a client portal and a client tool. So there's going to be solutions in here that you can pull out of this demo. So be on the lookout for that stuff. So I just want to bring it up.
Perfect. Yeah, cool. So, oh yeah, I need to share the screen. That usually helps. Here we are. Share. Just one.
And then I think, can you bump up the font a little bit too as well?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
I'll do that. Come here.
There's always two types of coders, those who have light backgrounds and those who have dark backgrounds.
So I actually keep switching it because like depending where I'm presenting, like the contrast might be either messing it up or helping. So like some conferences just like it's hard to see when you have light background, so just dark. So I don't know. I can't decide yet. What's your favorite?
Oh, I'm dark for sure. Even the app that I work on a daily basis is a dark theme. So they almost like I tweaked my color scheme to even match it. So I can't even tell sometimes whether I'm in my app or if I'm writing code.
That is so meta.
I'm a little bit of like a very particular person like that. Like I want it to all match, even if it's like code editing.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it makes sense. Although you could get confused. It's kind of like, what if the whole concept of inception happens to you, right? And you don't know whether you're coding your own life or what.
Yeah, I think there's two. There's the dark, the light, and then there's actually three. I'm sorry. There's the dark, there's the light, and then there's people who present and do videos. Now you're like in both spaces, depending on what the need is, right?
Yeah. Maybe we should create one theme that like reads feed from your camera and then sees what's the background behind you, and then automatically adapt the theme of Visual Studio Code. That would be something. I think I could go to ngCon with that.
That's just continuing our theme of Shark Tank here.
Yeah, coming up with ideas, right?
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so let me just show you a bit of code. And is this big enough? I think should be good. So yeah, what I did here, basically in my command, I just run this command, tns run iOS, and then that basically builds the application and then automatically deploys it to either a connected device, or in this case, it is a simulator from Xcode. So I'm just gonna let it run in the background. And then what it does is basically automatically updates every time I make a change to my code. So I can change hello world to, more exclamation marks. And then within a moment, it kind of reloads the application for me, which is very handy if you keep making a lot of changes. So what we have here is just a standard NativeScript project. So this is like what the HTML would look like. So we don't have a div, but for example, we have a stack layout so that if I keep adding new labels, let's say add a new label, they will get stacked one below the other, etc. So it's kind of like there's different types, like you can use flexbox, grid layout, and all sort of them. I'm not a designer, so stack layout is my choice for life. Trust me, is the best. So as we are in Angular, I can do stuff like, okay, I don't want to hard code the text. Maybe I can just read it from message that is inside my component. So I have here message saying hello ngAir, and I can kind of like display there. If I, for example, had just some sort of function, let's say do something, and maybe add a boolean all good, and that's not how you do it. Public.
Mixing languages, right?
Oh man, yeah, it's just in my head. So actually, I don't have to say what is going on. All right, final try. All good. Say true. All right, fine. So my do something function, for example, can take all good and set to the opposite value, right? So at the same time, I've got, like in my CSS, I've got this warning class. So I can apply a style. So I can say class.warning if all good. Write an expression, right? False. And then additionally, I'm going to add a button. So we have some nice code snippets here. So I'm going to say do something. And the function was do something. All right, that should work straight away. So here we have like a nice iOS button. And if I press on it, you can see like the styling of that label changes. We also have like some sort of theme. So like you were asking, like, can I style my application to look a little bit better? So I could, for example, use one of the pre-built ones. So say button primary, save that. And then that should reload like a slightly nicer button that still works. We could also use animations. So for example, oops, let's do this one. If I add keyframes for zoom, which basically transforms from, let's say, scale of 50% of the size, then 160%, and then back to normal. So I can use it as the animation here and run over 2 seconds. So what can happen now, once this reloads quickly, see we get kind of like this zoom in and out kind of effect on the label. And there's like a, just to make it better, I downloaded like a bunch of CSS animations from this guy, Danden, and then he had like a bunch of them. So I basically added them to my project. And then I can do something like this, where I can, for example, use the rubber band animation. And it kind of like goes like a squishy-washy kind of thing, which is pretty cool. So like, what I just want to show you is like that you can very quickly style your application, use the animations, how you basically, I can use like ngIfs, ngFors, etc. Like just what you would use in Angular. Like the difference here is like that we use different HTML tags. So we have like action bar, stack layout, etc. Some other things like the way, for example, we do navigation. So inside app module, for example, we would use the NativeScript router. So basically, where are we importing it? Yeah, so we got the app routing module from app routing. So you see, instead of the Angular router, we import our own implementation of the NativeScript router. So that let's say if you want to do a navigation inside your application, I have like a bunch of other pages here. So like
now,
I
do I have all the same functionality as the out of the box router in the in the NativeScript router?
Yeah, pretty much. So if we look, for example, how you define the routes, you just specify them exactly the same way. So you have like the path and the component that you want to use, and it's exactly the same thing. So the only difference is that what we use, so you use dependency injection to inject the specific router you want to use. So in context of code sharing, which I'll show you later, you would have two copies of the app module. So one will be for web, which will use the Angular one, navigation, and then the other one would use the NativeScript equivalent. But in terms of what you can do with it, is pretty much the same. So the only difference, so for example, if you want to add a router link to our buttons, so in NativeScript we actually have NS router link, which extends the standard one where we can also use like page transitions. So I have like a page transition curl, fade. So let me just show you how it works. So not only you get what you would expect out of the box, but you see we get kind of like the page curl effect, or I can do page flip, let's say slide. So this is the cool thing, because we top up the fact that you use an Angular project with the ability to get access to the native iOS transitions, and the same thing applies to Android projects, which I think is pretty cool. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I think that's another one of those like selling points, right? Of you going, okay, I have my own look and feel, but one of the reasons why we want to kind of go native is to leverage some of that stuff, like not only the native, hardware, but also some of these transitions and things like that, that native kind of feel.
Yeah, absolutely. And the best thing is like, it's just not the native feel, but it's literally you get the native user experience out of it. That's the cool things. Like for the curl transition, like we didn't have to implement the animation how this works. We literally under the hood, we calling the animation curl function from iOS itself, which is pretty cool.
Yeah,
So,
it's those established behaviors, right? I mean, you in your application, your design, you're creating new behaviors for the way your app works, but there's also something about leveraging those existing ones so that the bridge of that gap of how the environment that they're experiencing your app on, they can do similar things that feels comfortable to them,
Yeah, totally. So, and then you have all this sort of things like, you can have services that you can make them injectable, that return specific data or perform specific operations. And it's pretty much anything you would want to do is you kind of like could go intuitive into it and just say, well, this is how I do it in web. Let me try and see if it works in mobile. And 90% of the cases is going to be, the code is going to be identical. Sometimes you might have mostly the differences are in HTML. So like in here, we use NS router link as opposed to router link. So the thing as well, like I want to show you just not only like how the whole thing works, but in general, like how the project is structured. So that's pretty much like the where the code sharing comes in, is like where we normally should have a look at how a web project is structured, and then how a NativeScript is structured, and like how could we bring them together. But pretty much like we keep our components like at the app level. So in the case of a web project, you'd as well have an app folder, and like you have all your modules, routing, main files, pretty much everything sits in the same place. So that should be pretty comfy. So the challenge of like, if we were to move into code sharing, would be how can we merge the two together, and what could we do to separate them? So do you guys have any questions that are native specific, or because I can jump in the code sharing part now?
I think we're good to jump into the code sharing. So this is
Sure.
kind of straightforward. I mean, just to summarize really quick, you have a lot of Angular stuff in here, with the view, really, the markup being the difference, right? Or the markup where we're leveraging these NativeScript elements and tags, but behind all that is all this Angular stuff that we're used to doing in the web space.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah.
And
if you go on.
Similar in the markup, we're doing similar patterns that we do in our Angular markup, right? These data binding, the event binding, that sort of thing.
Absolutely, yeah. That's pretty much the same. So if any of you wants to learn a bit about like using NativeScript in the context of Angular or as a core, you can just go to nativescript.org, and we have like a couple of tutorials. So for example, you could go get started with TypeScript and Angular. So it kind of like takes you through the steps on how to install it and create projects, etc. So that could be a pretty good starter. In terms of code sharing itself, there is a bunch of Angular seeds that we basically use as a foundation for those. So there's one from Nathan Walker. There's one from Team Maestro, which is actually my current favorite. Sorry, Nathan. Which basically the two of them allow you to like give you the scaffolding on how the project should be structured, and as well have the build mechanism that allows you to kind of build comfortably either web projects or mobile projects. So in terms of, let's say, I'll talk to you a little bit about the Team Maestro one. Let me bring it up. So I have this project over here. The way it works is we have this source folder over here where we write our code internally. So we would have modules like, for example, a lazy cat module, right? Which has its own roots, it's got its own module file, it's got its components, right? So, and then we have, for example, this is the HTML component for our web file, but for the NativeScript file, we use this notation where we just say .tns.html. So internally, we have like a build process that if you're building for web application, we're going to pick this file. If for NativeScript, we're going to pick this one. But then at the same time, the lazy cat component TypeScript file, the class file, is actually just one component that is shared between the two. There's another example I have is the infinite component. So for example, we have just one roots file, but we have two module files. So one is infinite-module.ts, one which is for web. And in this case, for example, we're importing an infinite roots, that wasn't the thing. Oh yeah, we were importing the infinite scroll module, which allows me to kind of like keep scrolling and adding new components, while the NativeScript one didn't require it. So we have like two separate ng modules implementation. And then in my components, then we have one that kind of like has the page view, and then the other one that has the implementation of the template for each item, what we want to kind of display. So that's kind of like, these are the whole thing of separating what's web and what's mobile. It pretty much happens by us calling something .tns.something or or just without .tns. So even if you want to have two CSS files, we'll just have another one that is basically infinite component .tns.css if you want SCSS if you wanted that.
And I noticed in your, if you open that back up and you go to infinite component there, I noticed those are referencing the .html files. And so at your build time, you're just making that replacement given for whatever platform you're targeting.
Yeah. So yeah, there is a replacement, but what we're doing is basically, so what happens is we have this source folder here, but in here we have a NativeScript folder as well. And then basically this NativeScript folder source here, it's symlinked to the other one. And in this case, what we're pretty much doing, so let's say I'm going to open the infinite one. You see, we're going to just load the .tns files whenever there's more than one. So in terms of component, and then we have, say, infinite, you see, we're loading the infinite component .tns.html. Which pretty much just picks up the NativeScript version. And then what really happens behind the scenes, like we have a Gulp build process. So the process basically just goes and looks for any .tns files, and then it will rename them, like you will remove the .tns part. So like over here we had before the component, like this file, like during the build process, we're gonna rename this file to just lazy cat component.html. So it's pretty much like the Gulp process, which is as well triggered by like an npm run functionality that allows us to kind of combine the two. So let me find you that part. So
No, that's okay. I just wanted
Yep.
to point that out for the viewers, that like how that magic was happening at the build time.
Yeah, but pretty much like this is what we do at the build time. We run npm run prep CLI, for example, tablet. So that will be the gulp process that is over here. And then once that's done, we actually running the NativeScript tns run iOS command to execute the actual build. So some other things that we're doing in the way we structure the project, for example. So if I just go to the very root of the project itself, so we will have two, like from the main app modules, like we will have two copies of it. So there will be one for the web, which would use the standard Angular modules for routers or the HTTP module, while the NativeScript one it would use its own like a HTTP module, and then but then some of the other things will be shared. Same thing, like I created, for example, this assets pipe. So this pipe, for example, is basically kind of like a transfer. If you want to, let's say, get an image from the assets folder, you'd usually in a web project start with like // and then provide where the file is. In NativeScript, we actually use ~/. So this pipe kind of can handle it for you. And then some of the tricks. So this is like a trick I used in order to make the whole shareable quite streamlined. I created a shared module. So basically, the shared module for web would, for example, use the common module and the forms module, and then as well, like maybe add the assets pipe into the web shared module. And then for NativeScript, would the same thing, but we would load the NativeScript equivalents. So then later on, let's say like when we're looking at the lazy cat module, you see, I'm just getting I'm saying, hey, I want to get the shared module. And what happens here is if we're building a web project, we're going to get the shared module from the shared module.ts. But if we're building a web project, we're going to get the one from .tns.ts. And basically just adding into the imports. And then that just provides us with all the core modules that we would need for this specific component. And that's why we can just have one single module for this for the lazy cat.
And so that's essentially because at the build time, it's copying all those files, renaming them, and then running like the TS build or whatever on this code, right?
Exactly, yes. So when we build this project, we would copy this file for mobile, rename it to .ts, and then this will be provided inside as a result into our shared module.
So now this fits for a project in which we're going, okay, we want the same UI for our existing app to be in the mobile space, right?
Yep.
Versus something like, because another aspect would be we want to build a mobile version of our application that's actually going to be different than the current web application that we have, but embodying the same type of underlying code to get things done, right?
Yep. Yep. So let me actually, because I should show you how this thing works in action. So basically from the core folder, I can just run ngserf, which builds the web project. And then for NativeScript, I have to go inside the NativeScript folder over here. And then from here, I'm just running npm run iOS. It would be cool, like if I could actually show you how this whole thing looks, because there's one thing me talking about it, and another thing to actually show the result of it. So while that's building, I'm just gonna bring this over. Oh, actually, I built. I just realized because I had two similar projects and I built the wrong one. All right, ngserf npm run. All right, so this is actually the home and about page is what you should get if you just using the seed as it is provided out of the box. The one with the lazy cut and the infinite, that was like one of the examples I was creating for an article I'm writing about. So let's see if this loads. All of a sudden, my laptop decided to become slower. I blame Broco. Yeah.
Hangouts is it always makes my computer so slow.
Yeah, I don't know why. I mean, it might be that I have 74 tabs open as well. So, okay, that's built. All right, the mobile app is being built in the meantime. So, for example, like we have like simple navigation, like we have a simple page, we have like an about page that is lazy loaded. We have our lazy page as well with Garfield. And then we have like, for example, the infinite one I was showing you before. So that's the one that uses the infinite scrolling. So I can keep going and keep scrolling. And funny enough, like as well, and we probably can come back to that later if we have a bit of time, the module comes in with a translation module automatically. So I built like an ugly version of the navigation bar. So just like we've seen before, we have the simple page here. So we have a simple one here and here. We have the about page, which is also lazy loaded. But if I go, for example, like, yeah, lazy kind of displays the same kind of joke. So just let's have a look at the lazy page quickly and the code for it. So in itself, lazy cat is all about just the two HTML files. The actual component is identical. So in this case, we just have like a couple of paragraphs and we're displaying an image. And then we use as well like a translate and assets pipe that just loads the image for us. And that's how, in this case, we're getting this text over here and the image. And then for NativeScript, the equivalent, so you see like we're actually using a label, but as well like we use the translation to get the lines for what John says, what Garfield says. And let's say if I change the language, it kind of switches between English and Spanish. Then the infinite loader, that's a slightly better example. So in this case, the infinite component itself, it just has like an array, and then basically we keep adding 20 items every time we reach the bottom of the array, right? So if we are, let's start with the web, we have this div that, we basically have like an ng4. So we basically displaying a bunch of items, and every time we scroll to the bottom, we just add 10 items, right? So I can like keep calling add 10 items over and over again. While for what we do in NativeScript, we're using a list view with an ng template. So that's something you should be used to as well, ng template. But then every time list view will trigger this load more item event every time we reach the bottom of the list. So like if I scroll, like it will keep adding 10 items and then 10 items, etc. But they both share like just this very basic component logic. And obviously we can build a lot more complex examples with services that use HTTP module that can, for example, perform login, use Firebase, or pretty much anything you want. But that's the idea. What do you guys think of this?
I like it. I like the concept of it. Shows the power of the fact of how Angular and the platform was built, and the separation of the renderer. The fact that you're able to now do this with the renderer replacement, right? But yet still use all the underlying plumbing for the logic and stuff, which is a very powerful example of that.
Yeah, yeah, and like maybe like these examples like just like very basic components, but like the whole idea is that I have everything in one place. Like I don't have to create separate services or the component logic separately. The only thing that I do separately is just what goes in the UI.
So how on the render part of it, like, was that pretty challenging? Do you know, like in the sense of, let's say I wanted to go and build a render that supported Markdown instead of HTML, right? Like, is that something that a user could take on, or was that pretty challenging to work with a render right now?
So yeah, building render was quite challenging, but mostly because of like we were building and this version of NativeScript. So actually, so when we started building the Angular extension, we already finished like the version 1 of NativeScript, which was using core. And then when we started building version 2 was at the same time as you had all the release candidates for Angular, right? So the really painful thing was like every time we build the render and build all the parts, we had to rewrite the bits every time there were like breaking changes. But in terms of like what the Angular team said, like how everything should work, and us trying to plug into it, it was actually fairly straightforward. So like it just shows how the framework was pretty well designed. Like our devs, like at the beginning, they thought like, oh yeah, we're gonna provide feedback and they're gonna make some changes so that we could use NativeScript. Actually, we didn't have to provide too much feedback because most of the things just worked as it was as per the documentation. So it was all about like, hey, here's an abstraction. If you implement your renderer this and this way, it would just work, and it just did work. So like the challenge was more about like how do we then translate all that to iOS code or Android code.
Right. So what about the story that if I were to want to build a native application that actually has a different UI experience in terms of maybe it's a lighter weight app, right? I have a web-based app for managing conference schedule and stuff, and then I have this lighter weight native app that I want to build, but I want to share that code across those, right? I want to share services, maybe I even want to share component or modules or that sort of thing.
Okay, so there would be like, so there wouldn't be like a complete overlap, like the services would be the like as the overlap, you mean? So in this case, like the way I would see it, and you'll pretty much just do the same thing if I told you, can you build 2 web applications, one for administrators, one for users? You'd probably create them as 2 separate projects, but what you would do is you would structure your services and maybe publish them as like at least internal NPM modules, and then use like the node modules and kind of as a way to share your share your services between the 2 projects. Or at least that's the way I see it. So unless you're trying to build an app that has exactly the same functionality for web and mobile, you should probably just you should probably separate those 2. But yeah, for anything that is reusable, I would create like an NPM module for it, document it nicely, and then just use the standard NPM installers for that.
Now, it's also possible to take that and say, I have this project structure, folder structure, right? And I have now this shared code in a folder that's on the same level as the 2 apps, and then via imports with TypeScript and stuff like that, now be able to leverage that shared code that's being imported and built for both of those, right? And that could be a potential another approach. Because I think in terms of, you know, that whole, the NPM modules and things like that, it's this structure that's proven that gives you this path to do that. But sometimes there's some friction there, right? Like if you're going, okay, I have the shared code and it formats a string and I need to get it updated, and I just need to change a little bit in there. Now I need to also NPM install that and update versions in all of my other apps that are using that, versus if it just had access to the shared code and compiled it on its own, then I wouldn't have to NPM install and update all those other ones. So that could be another potential approach, right?
I think it would be, yeah. The only challenge I could see in that is maintainability, right? So like if let's say you asking me to set up a project on my machine and I just joined the teams, like setting that up could be challenging unless you have everything under one, let's say, GitHub repo. But if you were to store them in 2 separate ones, like you might have a bit of a challenge in there.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I would think in terms of like you have a mono repo or a single project that embodies all of those, then it's a little easier, right? But if you get into separate, then yeah, the NPM story is a lot better there.
Yeah, to me, like this would work for as long like the project doesn't get too complex. Like once the complexity grows too much, I would definitely want to use something well proven like NPM to manage your packages and kind of say like, hey, here's the way of doing it. Plus, you know, there's tons of tutorials on how to create new packages, how to structure it, where to put what. So it's kind of like you have a lot of best practices that go with it as well.
Yep, makes total sense. Cool. All right. Well, we're at the top of the hour, so we better wrap things up and then get to our picks and stuff. Any last final things on the NativeScript stuff, the sharing the code? Austin, you got any questions or anything you want to point out? Everything good?
So everything I talked about today and loads of Garfield pictures, I'm gonna post a blog post about it, which is gonna be like a 2 hours read because I just want to be rogue. But it explains exactly step by step how I built, for example, this example. So in terms of like if for any takeaways, where are we? So yeah, that's the repo I was showing you today. So that's the github.com/sebavita Angular native seed, and this is the examples branch. So that's the one I was showing you earlier on. Maybe I haven't zoomed in the proper place. So that's the example I was showing, and then like tomorrow I'll be publishing an article that kind of takes how to create a lazy cat and infinite and how to use translation module, etc. But yeah, like if you guys have any questions, just give me a shout. I'm on Twitter, Sebavita. So that's me over here. So I'm more than happy to answer any questions and help out and stuff.
Nice.
Floor is yours, Justin.
Nice. All right. I'm gonna stop presenting here. Boom. Okay. All right. Well, let's get to picks. Austin, you have any picks today?
I only have one, and it's a self-plug. Last week, I published an article on doing authentication with Angular and JWT. So it talks about routing guards and error handlers and default HTTP options for sending, tokens and things like that. So I would suggest checking that out. I'm not a great author, but it's got a lot of good tidbits in it.
Yes, that was a very good article, and it's a really good prelude to an episode that we're going to have here in a couple weeks about authentication. So definitely, viewers, check that out, and then get ready for that episode in a couple weeks. Cool. That it? Just the one?
Yeah, just the one. I think the internet was a little quiet this week with all the holidays.
Right. All right. I have two. Just because it got a little bit busier this morning, so I was able to pick one up this morning. So first one is Angular Camps starting up, I think, tomorrow. And so there's going to be a live stream, so you can catch all the videos, and they're going to be recorded. So check that out at angularcamp.org/live. And that should get the link on that. It's a little bit early for a live stream for us over here in the States, and especially on the West Coast. It's like I think it's going to be like 2 a.m. my time. So I may have to catch the recordings. We'll see. I don't know. But check that out. And then an article, Angular Best Practices, the July edition, Stephen Fluin put that out. Just saw a link about it today. So that looks pretty interesting at his blog, Fluin, FLUIN.io. And check that out. It talks about bundling and thoughts of your code size and things like that. So looks pretty interesting. Sebastian, you have some picks or?
I got actually one. So we've got an event called Native to Developer Day coming up in September 18 to 19 in New York. So if you want to come over, see me in person, Tracy Lee's going to be there. So you should definitely come over. So we have one in New York, and then also we'll have one like a week later in Europe, in Rotterdam, Netherlands. So that'll be a cool one.
Nice. All right. Actually, one more thing. Do you have your robot?
I do. Where is it? Me
Can I
push.
make a screen appearance? We got some
All right,
people.
give me a second. I've got his black cousin. Oh yeah, I've got both of them. Can you hear me?
Now, do they have their own Twitter handle yet?
Actually, this one has. So he's got a Twitter handle called NativeScript Meep, like MIP, and he can talk. Go and say hi. And they're pretty happy. So I actually use them for talks and stuff like that. So you've seen them, right? Like at NG Cruise. So yeah, they can run around, talk. They can dance, but I don't have enough desk space to show you how it's done. Maybe next time. Yeah, this one is very popular with ladies, by the way. He's got some very inappropriate pictures on Twitter, so be prepared.
Forward. All right. Yeah, Sebastian does these talks, and he shows code written in in Angular NativeScript to control these robots, and it's pretty awesome. Yeah, and then like you said at NG Cruise, some other implementations with that, with dancing around stuff like that's pretty cool. Pretty cool. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I'm actually gonna upgrade because you remember Alex was showing us the Mayo armband that you're putting. So what I'm working on now is to control the robot with my arm. So I'll be just basically going like go left, go right, go up, show them the finger or something. So that should be fun.
Now you just need some funding for an army of those robots that you can all control at once, right?
It's already happening. It's already happening. I just call it the NativeScript project, right? So everybody thinks that we're building mobile apps, but that's not what I'm after.
Nice. All right. Well, thanks a ton for coming on the show. Appreciate your time. Appreciate you showing off this stuff and taking the time. Thank you.
Absolutely. Love to be here. Thanks for having me.
For sure. Anytime. All right. That's a wrap for today. We'll catch you next week. We're going to have Frosty on next week for talking about components as a service. So definitely want to check that one out. And we'll see you all next week. Later.